Now, I may or may not have mentioned this to you last week. I don't remember. All right. But if we get through between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, if we get through chapters 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24, which I think we can do, then Friday I will allow you to work from home. That's the first day I'm doing that with you guys this semester. You'll be marked here, all right? But all I will ask that you do is to basically send me an email saying that you're online. I'm going to be here, all right? I may, you know, before Friday, give you something real simple to do. And whatever it is, it'll be simple. It really and truly will. All right. I've been a little lax this semester with the afternoon class. We average about every other week. We've got one day that we call a virtual day. Well, the main reason for that is that's when they've been working on their projects. All right. And I know that in there they have been doing it because I'll be here and I'll get emails. Hey, I'm having problems with this type of an idea. Okay. All right. So again, we've gone through the first 19 chapters of the book. We'll go through chapter 20 right now. How to use ADO.NET to write your own data access code. You'll see how much more powerful this stuff is in this chapter. And what do I mean? I mean that what it does is it does allow you to go in and make changes, and they're permanent changes. So we're going to look at that. All right. Chapter 21, we will go over probably both 21 and 22 tomorrow. 21 it's a pretty simplistic chapter. It's how to use files, which is kind of the anti-database. All right. So we'll talk about file handling, and we'll talk about how to use XML files, because both those chapters are fairly short. All right. Then on Wednesday, we'll go into how to use LINQ. We'll go over the examples that are in the book, and I've got a reading that if you're more interested in this, I'll put it out there so you can take a look at it. The thing that's neat about LINQ, and I think I've mentioned this before, is it virtually allows you to use almost anything as though it was a database. You can use it on databases. But for instance, if you think about some of the programs that we've done where we've had a list of something, all right, it's typically pretty hard to go into a regular list and, for example, to go in there and do like a lot of sorting and the like. With LINQ, you can do that. All right. And then again, on Thursday, we would go over chapter 24, which is one of the longer chapters, and it's fairly complex. So if we get all that done, and again, I'm hoping that we do, all right, one of the things I'm going to do after we finish with chapter 20 today is I'm going to attempt to log in as all of you into the Rankin server to make sure those are still up and running. Sometimes if they're not used for a while, the account shuts down, and all I have to do is basically in the master thing that I've got, put your login and your password back in, and boom, they're active again. All right. The plan is then that next Monday, all right, I will go over an example, and I will show you very simply how you can use Mobilize to build one of these. It won't be any more than an hour. Now, if you either did not complete this last semester or didn't do it at all, and you know who you are, I'm not blaming anybody, I'm just telling you, it's 150 points. So it's probably enough that if you're right on the cusp, let's just say you've got a low A going or whatever, and you don't do it, it's going to knock you down. You know it. You know that it will. All right. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday will be days for you to work on the project or your portfolio. What I'm expecting is that by 8 o'clock on Thursday night, you will have turned in your electronic portfolio. Did you all hear that? All right. And then Friday, you won't be required to come. If you've got work to turn in or whatever and you want to come, that's fine. You will all be marked here. As long as, so your attendance for Friday will be by 8 o'clock on Thursday, did you turn in your electronic portfolio? All right. I've got to create these forms that are always due, right, of course, right when grades are due, and they're called SOA forms, Student Outcome Assessment Forms. you may or may not remember, but when we went over at the beginning of the semester, when we looked at the first day of class, when we looked at your syllabus, it had some outcomes that you were all supposed to get out of this class, okay? And I have to fill them out, and I have to go look at the grade book and say, okay, out of all the people in the class, this many people fulfilled this requirement, this many people did not. And the way that I'm graded, so to speak, is did 70% or more of students, they actually shoot for 75% or more of students meet this, okay? This has been a tough thing. And I don't know if I told you guys this before, but I was talking to Mr. Gudmested over at St. Louis, and he's telling me that he's typically losing more than 50% of his students after the first semester. All right. And a lot of them, they say they got in it because they thought, oh, computers, cool. It's like, but why did they leave? Wow, a lot of work. Yeah, you do get a lot of work in here. I will tell you that this school is so much more regimented than the school that I taught in Wisconsin. There, I made up whatever assignment I wanted. I could make it due whenever I wanted. And people started complaining and, oh, we need more time, or this wasn't good, or whatever. I could change whatever I wanted. Here, it's not like that. All right, they're very lockstep. But I will tell you that the students from here, I think, are better prepared for a job out in industry than the students were from the school I used to work at. Again, that's just my opinion for whatever it is or is not worth. So 20 today, 21 and 22 tomorrow, 23 on Wednesday, 24 on Thursday. So with that said, let's jump into chapter 20. All right. It says in the last two chapters, for lack of better words, you didn't write much code. I would think it's really kind of fair to say you wrote virtually no code. You may have gone in and you may have changed code that was there, but even that, more than anything else, you changed settings, all right, more than anything else. So it says, now you will learn how to work with and create and work with ADO.NET objects through code. That lets you separate the data access code from the presentation code. There's all sorts of terms for this. All right. The class that you guys are taking in fall that we used to have, we dealt a lot with what's called Model View Controller, MVC. All right. I'm just very quickly going to tell you that with Model View Controller, the view is, when you run the program, it's what the user sees. The model is a combination of the data and the business rules. So for instance, I mean, think of it this way. If it's the first day of class and we got 10 people in the class and I look around, there's 11 people. So I take attendance, okay? And I noticed that there's one person who's sitting up there and I said, you're not on my list. When did you register? I didn't register. I'm just going to sit in the class. Well, the school doesn't let you do that, right? You can come in one day when we've got our shadow attack, etc., but you can't come in every day. Now, there are places that let you do things like that, where you audit or you do whatever. But the point is, one of the business rules of this college is they have to at least cover their costs. This is not a profit-making college, all right? I mean, they survive for a lot of reasons, but they at least have to cover their costs. It's going to be very interesting with all the stuff that President Biden has proposed, things like free community college. I don't know if we fall into that realm or not, all right? Guess we'll find out. Okay, so the other thing that you've got there in the MVC is the controller. The controller is like the supervisor. So a request comes in, you are sitting there at your machine. You're considered the client. You make some kind of a request. That request can go to one of any controllers that are in there, depending on the type of request it is. All right. And what happens typically is that controller figures out, oh, that information is in the database. I got to call this database server to have it do something. So it does its thing. It returns something back to the controller, and the controller passes it back out to the view. All right. So the controller is the go-between. It's the liaison type of an idea. And that's kind of what they're talking about here. All right. And it says these classes are often reusable. Well, that would make sense, wouldn't it? And I've given this example before, but I just want to say it one more time, and that is, let's say that I write, Enterprise comes back in fall, let's say, and they come up and say, hey, we wish, we're having a problem with our reservation system. Would you and your class be willing to rewrite it? So we rewrite it. Everything's hunky-dory, and it's working really well. And then somebody from a local hotel comes over and says, well, we have a reservation system too. It's not identical to theirs, but it does most of the same stuff. Well, if we write our upper level classes in a generic enough way, we can modify the stuff down below so that we're able to create a reservation system for them as well. That's what you're shooting for. All right. So how to work with connections and commands. Some of this you've already seen. If you remember, one of the reasons that at first I had us come in and remember when we went in and we created the SQL connection and the SQL, data command, etc. That's what a lot of this chapter is about. All right. And I was going to do more on this, but I kind of pushed back just because of the fact we're so late in the semester. That's the only reason. I mean, to really give this stuff due diligence, we would have had to have started on it earlier. So again, we're supposed to have meetings this summer, me and Evan and Paul, and we have to talk about a better way of coming up and taking our time and making sure we cover all of the material. So, how to work with connections and commands, how to work with parameters, how to execute commands. And then the brunt of the chapter here, the last 20 or 20 some pages, is this customer maintenance application that uses the commands. It's a fairly, believe it or not, simplistic application, and I just wanted to show it to you. So you come in there and notice customer maintenance. So customer ID, I'm going to put in 13. I don't even know if we have a customer 13. There it is. See that? I don't know how well that resonates from right there. But we've got Nadine Nichols, 7403 or 3 rather, Twin Brooks Boulevard. So I decided I don't want BLVD. So I want BOULE. I got to type in modify. All right, so it brings up another screen. It looks the same as the other one, but this is different. So now I come in here and I type in BOUL Boulevard, just like that. And then I say accept. And you may or may not be able to tell, but it's been changed in here. All right. Now, I come in here and I'm going to click exit. And I'm going to run it again. And I'm going to put in 13 and click get customer. And notice the change has persisted. See that? It says Boulevard. That's what we want. All right. One of the things I'm interested in is, I think a week from today, you're going to be doing your course evaluations. And, rip me all you want. That's fine. But what I want to know is, did we spend too much time on one thing, not enough on other things? Please write that kind of stuff down if you're asked for comments. Because this is the stuff that gets shared between my boss and between the instructors in St. Louis. So when we figure out how to do this stuff, all right, that's the only way we get any better. All right. So taking it from the top then. Before you can access the data in a database, you must create a connection object. Well, everything that we've been doing thus far, all that stuff has been being done for us. We haven't had to worry about it. But again, you're somewhat hamstrung doing that because there's only a certain amount of stuff that you can do. All right. And it says then you must create one or more command objects that contain the SQL statements that you want to execute against the database. Well, again, just bringing this thing up one last time here. I'm not going to run it, but I do want to show you that when you look right here, well, what do we have? This is the modify one here. So it's got everything that a customer has: their name, their address, their city, their state, and their zip. All right, so you can change any of those. What you'll notice, what's not up there is the ID, because you're not able to go in and change that. And that's, again, the way that it should be. So you come up here and you've got this maintenance form. All right, and this maintenance form right here looks almost identical to this one right here. I mean, look at this: name, address, city, state. Name, address, city, state. All right. and zip, okay? But so you get the idea, all right? And when you, but the difference is when you come in here, you can bring up, you've got three choices. What can you do? Well, if I run this and I immediately click modify, nothing's going to happen because I haven't put in the record I want to modify. Same thing if I click delete, nothing's going to happen because I haven't put in a record to delete. But if I click add, boom, it's going to bring up basically this thing. Does that make sense? And this form really is going to do double duty. What do I mean? Well, it's going to be the same form whether I'm adding or whether I'm updating. I don't have to show everything when I'm deleting. I can, but I don't have to. So again, when you look at this, if I run this again, I'm just going to keep using what I've been using. So 13, all right, get customer. Well, there it is. Now, if I click add, it's basically thinks I want to add a new record here. Not a new 13, but a new record. All right, so I'm going to cancel out of that. If I click modify, it brings that one up, but it copied everything over, so I can change anything that's in here, including the state. All right. And if I click delete, notice what happens. It doesn't delete it. But it basically is saying delete, and it grabs what's in the name field, which is Nadine Nichols. So it puts it in just like that. Delete. You could bring that one up as opposed to doing this. All right, but, okay, you've already gotten the customer, right? So it should be in the background here. So this is the one that we're about to delete. All right, I'm just going to say no. All right, and then there's exit. Okay. So as it says, and we'll look at this in just a second, but on the next page, it shows you how to create and use an SQL Server database. As they mentioned, you specify a connection string when you create the connection. And as I mentioned to you, what we've done in the last week or two is we've just basically we've set up the connection string, but all that code has been written for us in the background, so to speak. All right. Before you can use a command to access the database, you need to open the database connection. When you're done working with a database, you should close the connection. And that's simply, if you call your connection string con, it's con.open and con.close. If you forget to do that, if you forget to close the connection and the program ends, the connection is closed. But again, if you are using a database where many people are sharing the same one and you open the connection, if you're not sure what you're doing, it's possible that you can lock other people out from being able to use that database. Believe me, that stuff does happen. And think about why. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, and I don't even know if it's changed. But I remember one of the last times when I was living in, still living in Illinois. All right, and for years I've been a fan of the Milwaukee Bucks. And I wanted to know if there were tickets left for this Bucks game. It was right near the end of the year. So I got into, it was like Ticketmaster, one of these places, and I got in there, and they basically, what they did was they took a snapshot of all the available tickets. And they said, you now have 90 seconds where you can purchase any of these tickets that are available. And after 90 seconds, it went away. And it went away because I was locking other people out because the tickets I wanted and the tickets they wanted could have been the same tickets. All right. So for 90 seconds, I literally was locking other people out of their database. That's the type of thing that can happen depending upon the application. All right. It says the figure also shows some of the common values that you specify in a connection string for an SQL Server database. The first two examples show connection strings for the local DB, and the connections for the local DB uses, it's how you're connecting. That's really and truly not that important. There are a lot of different ways that you can connect. I think, and I believe we're using this same book, except the 2017 edition, which is their newest one on this, not the 2015 like you have. I think we're using this book a year from now, I think. All right. But 2 years from now, I know for sure it's going to change because the focus of the class is going to change. I believe that the next time I do this, what I might do is just use the examples that are in their book. And I don't know if you would have been better served going through the examples that are in their book and doing the homework that was in their book, or what I had you do. I don't know. All right. And again, that's the kind of thing, feel free to fill that stuff out when you're doing your course evals. All right. So the connection string for the SQL Server Express database specifies the name of the server. You already know this. I've already shown you how to create that. All right. It says the localhost keyword indicates that the SQL Express database server, in other words, it says that you're using the same machine as both your client and your server. All right. We've talked about this before. Because the requirements for each provider differ, you may need to consult the documentation. Well, the key thing there is, this will work fine if you're doing it in a testing mode. But if you put this out on a server someplace, you're going to have to change that connection string. All right. So, it says the third connection string shown in this figure is for access. And if you remember, the only thing I'll say about that is access is an example of an OLEDB, an object linking and embedding database, even though Access is a Microsoft product. All right. I mean, let's face it, for many reasons, Microsoft would rather have you use SQL Server than Access. Number one, Access is free. Comes with the Microsoft Office suite of products. Number two, it's designed to work really with a limited number of users. I think I told you about this. I had a student who was working on an application for a company, and they had about 10 people using it and worked fine. Then they hired a bunch more people, and the app kept crashing, and they wanted it moved to an SQL Server database. All right. Now, they do mention this about those 2 backslash characters, and I showed you you don't have to do that anymore. You can put the the @ sign at the beginning rather than doing that. All right. The author says, before I go on, you should realize that the connection strings for production applications are frequently stored in configuration files that are outside of the application. That way, if they need to be modified, they can be. Also, you don't want to store them anywhere that anybody can, for lack of better words, get to your code and find out things they shouldn't be able to find out. All right. So this is stuff we've looked at before. Connection string. All right. And what they're saying here is if you call a new connection string like this and don't pass in the string, it must already have been set in the program. So if you want more control, you will do it the second way. Open and close, we talked about. All right. Some of the values, I'm not going to read these to you, but this is some of the stuff that you might find in a connection string. The ones that we cared about was what? The initial database and the integrated security were what we did. We didn't even worry about user ID and password because, again, we used Windows authentication. This is if you're using SQL Server authentication. So they give you some examples here. I'm not going to read through any of those, but again, you don't need the double backslash if you put an @ sign before. So if we had it right there, we would be fine. Okay? All right. How to work with and create and work with commands. Again, after you've established the connection, what you do is you create strings, and those strings hold your SQL commands. All right. And I've mentioned this term to you before. These are typically Crud strings, where you either create something, you select something, which means you're looking at it but can't change it. You update something, and creates, of course, also called insert. You update something or you delete something. All right. And that's what they're talking about in here. In fact, they mention this command type property. And the command type property is typically what you're going to use to say select command, update command, insert command, or delete command. One of those. All right. Now, if you've got stuff you do on a regular basis, so if you've got stuff you're doing all the time, why would you want to have to keep coding stuff in? What you can do, and they mention this here, we don't go into any of this in here, but if you notice, they call a stored procedure here. And all a stored procedure is it's code that somebody has written that they've saved that other people can use. And it's typically one or more queries. And why would you want to do that? Because if you're running very complex queries, you may have some database developer who's already created the query for you, and all you have to do, for lack of better words, is plop it into your program, and you're able to use it. And that's what they're talking about in here. All right. They also mention in here, it says that when you run execute, it says you can use the execute reader command. All right. You can use the execute scalar command, and you can use the execute non-query command. All right. Typically, the scalar, as it says, returns a single value. The non-query is the result of an action query. Typically, you use the scalar with a select and the non-query with the insert, the update, and the delete. All right. And they will talk about those more in this chapter. All right. If you want more than I'm giving you, or don't like what I've given you, you can see the tables on this page. And again, here's some examples. So as we already mentioned, the thing that's nice about this, just so you know, if you look at this example right here, I don't know if you agree or don't agree, but that's pretty easy to read. And it's pretty easy to understand. When we go in and start working with databases in, for example, in Android, it's more of a, pardon my French, but a pain in the ass, just because of the fact that what you have to do in there is you have to separate these things out, each field out, and there has to be a certain amount of spaces between there. Capitalization can matter. You know, where here it doesn't. Now they've capitalized all their keywords, but everything else is just title case. But this whole thing could have been in lowercase, and it would have worked just fine. All right. And notice, as we've already said, so you come in here, you create a string. They call it select statement. Well, it couldn't be much clearer than that. All right. But the type in here under SQL command is the select statement, or the select, and that's really the select command. All right. We've already worked with parameters, but the work that we've done with parameters has been very limited. All right. You know this already. All right, so it says in Chapter 19, you learn how to generate a parameterized query from a bound control that was created using a data source. There, the parameters were generated for you based on, and we basically just did select statements. All right, so they mentioned what a parameter is. A parameter really is a variable, but it's really kind of neat in like a variable in a program. I mean, if I create a program that's going to ask you your age, and then based on your age, I tell you you can vote or you can't vote. All right, type of thing. All right, so if you're over 18 or over, you can vote. Otherwise, you can't. And if you leave it blank or you put in something non-numeric, it'll tell you you had invalid input. Make sense? All right. But we're using there basically a parameter. Age in that case is a parameter. We're using something that can change as the program's running. And as it says there, parameters let you create statements that retrieve or update database data based on variable information. All right. And then it says a select statement that uses parameters in a where clause is called a parameterized query. You've been doing that. We've been doing it. We've been using the @ sign. So we've said something like select, in all your fields from products where product ID equals @ product ID. The product ID is what's stored in the database. The @ product ID is what you enter. All right. And they mention in here, in some databases, rather than using the @ sign, you use a question mark. And I think they'll even show that. Yeah, there it is right there. So it looks a little weird. All right. Those are usually OLEDB databases. All right. But when you're working with a Microsoft database, the one they make you pay for, they make it as simple as possible to work with it. All right. This should look similar to you because this is stuff we've done before. All right. Let's see. It says you can also use parameters and insert and update statements. Why? Because typically when you're doing an insert, you're inserting one record. You can insert more, but typically it's one at a time. Typically when you're updating, it's not every record. We already talked about the fact that when you're updating and when you're deleting, you almost always put a where clause on there so that you don't update all records or delete all records. All right. So they come in here next and they talk about how to create parameters. All right, we'll go through this section and the next one, and there's about 6 or 7 more pages, but by 9:15 or so, we'll take a break, and we'll come back and we'll look at, in more depth and breadth of coverage, at the example they give for the rest of the chapter. All right, so it says after you define an SQL statement that contains parameters, you create the parameter objects, and they show you how to do that here. All right, so notice that's a new parameter object. What is it? Well, it's at customer ID. All right, what's its value? The customer ID. And you look at this and you're like, I don't understand exactly what that buys me. Well, what we've been doing, and really the way that it's been set up for us so far, is it's really only designed to work with select statements. But now we want to be able to come in here and not just look at a record, but we want to be able to change it and change it permanently. All right. So as mentioned, when you create a parameter, you specify the name along with a value and a data type and a size. If you don't specify the right stuff, all right, it says you can set the values of the associated properties after you create the parameter. Well, there's probably more work that you've got to do then to make sure that you're doing it correctly. Now, this is all used in kind of conjunction with what we've been doing. And what I mean is, again, in that data entry, simple data entry project that we did a couple weeks ago, you learn how to take a field and have it only hold numbers. Well, if you had a customer ID, you wouldn't be putting in the numbers, but if you had a price, you could set it up so it would only take numbers. All right. It says, in addition to a name, you must set a value for the parameter before you can use it. When you create parameters for an SQL Server command, you must give them the same names you used in the SQL statement. So in other words, notice again, we've got at customer ID and customer ID, the same stuff that we did before. All right. Now it says because the parameters for an OLEDB and ODBC aren't named because they use that question mark, then in that case you can call them whatever you want. All right. So working with parameters. After you create a parameter, you must add it to the parameters collection. That just makes it available to use. All right. It says because ADO.NET refers to SQL parameters by name, you can add them to the parameter collection in any sequence. So the order in which you put them doesn't matter. So they show some examples in here. So after you've created that, you can add it. All right. And again, if you don't put in the add with value, then you're going to have to add that someplace else in your code so it knows how to correlate everything. All right. And then finally, again, take a break in just a couple minutes, but how to execute the commands. It says the method you use to execute the SQL statement depends on what it is you're trying to do. As mentioned, the 3 methods you're most likely to use are execute reader, which is used with the select statement, execute scalar, where you want just a single record from a select statement, or a single value, and execute non-query, which is the one for everything else. And I don't know, I maybe even mentioned this last week, non-query always seemed counterintuitive to me. But what they're saying here, the reason they use non-query is if it works, you don't get data back. All you get is a message back that says 1 row deleted or whatever. All right, that's why it's called that. All right. So it says to execute a command that contains a select, you can use the execute reader. And that's the first one that's shown right here. Okay. So what do we have here? Well, we're opening the connection. So we're assuming we set that connection up here someplace. And then reader equals select command dot execute reader. All right. And wow, it looks a little weird here. List state states equals new state. All right. And then you come in here. I mean, this is pretty heavy. What this is saying is, hey, while I've got a state, all right, basically, for lack of better words, be able, add it to my list. So this is how you could fill up your list of states. All right. So as mentioned, you must open the connection that's used by the data reader before you can execute it. It's open automatically when it's created. While it's open, no other data readers can be open on the same connection. We've talked about that before, why that would be the case. All right. When you first create a data reader, it's positioned to the first row. All right. You can combine information together using the AND operator. You can also do it using the OR operator. All right. So when you want just a single value, rather than the execute reader, you use the execute scaler. As it says, in this case, a command contains a select statement. In the example here, it retrieves a sum of the invoice totals of the invoices table. Guess what? You know what that is. We've worked a little bit with those aggregate queries, the sum, the min, the max, the average, etc. All right. And then finally, as it says, you can use insert, update, and delete for the rest of the CRUD operations. The C, the U, and the D. All right. And again, they're called action queries. All right. And you execute the non-query command. And they show you some examples here. All right. So again, it always seems to work out like this every semester, that we've got 2 or 3 weeks left and databases could easily be more than a month. So they're always shortchanged. All right. So if you feel that that was the case, please put that down when you're doing your course evaluations. All right. So let's take a break. It is 9:08. Let's come back. Let's make it 9:25. All right. And we'll look at this customer maintenance application that uses commands. We've already looked at it, but we'll look at it in a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage. Okay. All right, so we've got maybe a half an hour or so to go. All right, I don't think any more than that. But as it says, this is the same application that they showed in chapter 18 of the book. The difference is now they're writing code. Okay. Now, a lot of the stuff that's on this page, I'm not going to read any of it to you because we've talked about it already. Okay. They mention things like they're using the same form for both the add and for the update. All right, and they changed actually the heading that's up there depending on whether it's an add or an update. And, that doesn't delete it automatically. Instead, it brings up the message box. So they tell you all that kind of stuff in here, okay? Now, this is kind of interesting because at the bottom of the page here, it says, at this point, you may be wondering why I used 2 forms to implement the customer maintenance application. The answer is that in the real world, most maintenance applications aren't this simple, and that's true. All right, they're making this very simple on purpose. Okay, there's also there's one table in here, so there's no ripple effect. Okay, in other words, what if I wanted to delete a customer? Okay, now it looks like I'm able to do it, right? But what if that customer had orders outstanding, or that customer owed us some money? We don't want to then delete that customer, all right? Or at least we want to provide some kind of a notice, all right, to let them know what I just said, all right? That's why it says the maintenance of a table will be combined with other functions, all right? Now, what they have done in this program, if you take a look at it, and I realize it's kind of tough for you to see in the back there, but they've got the 2 forms which you already looked at. There is a customer class, there is a state class, and there is a customer DB class to allow you to interface with the database. There is a state DB class which allows you to work with the database, and there's an MMA books which basically has got your connection in there. So if you look at the customer class, you could write that right now. There's nothing tough about this. Getters and setters in all the fields. All right. And for the state, the code and the name. Okay, that's it. Not hard at all. But what's a little bit more complex is the different things that actually work with the database. So we'll take a look at those in just a couple minutes. All right. And I've already shown you this, so I'm not going to say that again. Again, other than to say, notice here it says modify a customer. Had we clicked add instead, it would have said add customer up there. All right. All right. I mean, it should be pretty obvious to anybody looking at this how this works, what you have to do to make it work, etc. Now, next, they show you the class diagram and the database classes. In other words, when you look at this, you might look at this and say, oh, that's my database. And yeah, it pretty much is, but it's shown under the guise of a class diagram. So these are the classes that we have. All right, we've got a customer class that's got this stuff in it, a customer DB class, which has got our methods in it, a state class, which has got our database in it, and a state DB class with our methods in it. And notice with the state, the only thing that's in there is get states. Now, I mean, there's other things that we could do, but we're assuming that when they entered this, all right, we're assuming that they put in all states. We're also assuming when you look at this, at least currently, this is a national database, but not an international database. Does that make sense? Because if it was international, then you'd have to add more stuff in there for countries, country codes, etc., and then break it down in that way. All right. And I know, for example, they do that kind of stuff with Amazon because they sell all over the world. All right. So as it says here, this contains the classes that define the business objects used and the database classes. So again, these work with the database. Anything that says DB and the other stuff basically are what we're using to define what is in the database. So there is a correlation between these class fields and the fields in our database. All right. The only one when you look in there that we're not really worried about, notice for customer, address, city, state, zip. We're not worried about ID. All that stuff is being handled for us automatically by the way we set it up. So the business objects are defined by the customer and state classes. As it says, they will hold the data from the tables in the MMA books database. Classes that end with DB are database classes. You don't have to do that, but it makes it a lot nicer. Quite often that is what is done. In fact, what you may find in some different packages, for example, if you were to use ASP.NET, probably the stuff that you see here under customer and under state, those two right there would be under the models folder. The other stuff, the customer DB, the state DB, the books DB, might be under models, might be under controllers, might be under something under models. Like you probably would have a DB folder under models. All right. But the idea is you want to break that stuff down. And the reason for wanting to break that down is if it's a program of any magnitude, you're going to have multiple people working on it. All right. And as they mentioned, the state DB class provides a public method for getting the list of states. The customer DB provides public methods for getting data for the customer, adding, updating, and deleting. So all the CRUD stuff. And again, the MMA books just provides the method for getting the connection. And hopefully at least that makes sense. You want to define that connection in one and only one place, because not if, but probably when it's going to change, you want to only change it in one place. The worst thing you could do would be to change it in one place, but have it in multiple places and not change it in all of them. So the next thing they show you there is the code for the customer DB class. As it says, it returns a customer object that contains the data for the row that you asked for. Well, that should make sense. All right. But again, what impresses me here is not the brevity of the query, but just the intuitiveness of the query. All right. So, this is assuming, you say, well, we didn't define this at stuff, that's going to come later. But when you look at this, you should be able to read this from what we've gone over, and that should make total sense to you. At least the query should. All right. All right, and you'll notice in here we're adding to the parameters collection, and we're letting it know this parameter is associated with that field. And then notice again, because you're going to see this all over the place, that this stuff is in a try-catch block. If you try doing something, it's funny, I was just offered a thing during the break. I wish I would have saved it here, but I didn't. But it said, since I took this course online, they said, we want to offer you free 30-day access to our whole package, and you can look at and take one course for free out of that package. Fine. So this morning when I came in, I spent about 10 minutes. They probably have 300 courses. So it took a while to peruse my way through there. But I found one. I thought, well, that'd be good. So I went in, and of course, it says it's free. But after 1 month, it's $399 a month. So it ain't cheap, okay? And why do they do that? Well, they want to bring you in, right? It would make sense, for instance, if we got one of those, if we could all use it, something like that, that might make sense. But, they do a lot of that kind of work with customers. Well, the point is, it asked for my payment information. And this is the first time this has happened to me. You got to realize, even though I teach what I teach, I live with one of the probably most conservative people you'll ever know in your life, in my wife. And what I mean is, we've never had a debit card, either one of us. She still pays with everything with checks. All right. Walmart laughs at her sometimes. All right. But I've got a MasterCard, and I can use it whenever I want to, but I don't use it very often. All right. Well, that's how I tried to pay for this. And it never happened before, but it came back and it said that the method I was trying to use was unacceptable for this free offer. So I don't know what they were looking for, but it was something. All right. Okay. So again, we got the try catch. So we're setting it up right here. We're telling it to execute it. If everything worked, look right here on the screen, if you would. This should make sense to you. What we're doing is we're filling up, in this if statement here, we're filling up the screen. So that we're taking the stuff that's on the left-hand side of the equal sign, all right? And that's basically what we're going to end up putting into our text boxes. And this may be a lot more than this. In other words, the only exception that they're catching here is an SQL exception. Typically, at a minimum, if you're going to have that in there, underneath it, you're going to have catch exception, all right? Because if something happens that's not an SQL exception, it's going to try to continue, all right? And I think we've talked about this before, but on the off chance we have not, either what's going to happen here is this try is going to go all the way through, and you're going to skip the catch, or something in this try will fail, which means you'll do the catch, okay? But whether the try succeeds and you don't do the catch, or the try fails and you do the catch, you always do the finally block. And that's where you're always going to do your housekeeping operations, like closing database connections. That's considered a housekeeping application, or operation, I should say. All right, so this, we've also got in here, add customer. What's the difference? Well, that was a select to bring one up. This is an add to bring in a new one. All right, again, you should be able to look at this. The only thing that looks a little bit hinky from what we've done in the past is, now notice with the values. Those values, the at name, at address, at whatever, all that stuff, now it's those values represent what's in the text boxes. All right, and then we come up and we associate those parameters with the field in the database that they're connected to. And you'll notice again, before we do the operation, all right, and run the query, it's in a try-catch block. Okay, same kind of thing we talked about before. Then we've got an update. This is kind of a pain. Look at this. And in fact, what you'll learn, those of you who will be in the third semester class next semester, is that when you do this kind of stuff, quite often, not here, we have just one update statement. All right, but a lot of times you've got two different types of update statements. Why? Because if there were 50 fields in there, you'd have to include all 50, even if you were only changing one of them. All right, so for example, like when you work in Node.js, you start working with APIs rather, there's like a put which is kind of an update, and there's also a patch, which just says only the fields that I want to change, because it's a little bit easier to write. So look at how long this thing is. All right, kind of a pain. Real easy to make a mistake in there, but again, when you get all done, notice again, it's in a try-catch block. And then notice in here, if count greater than 0, return true, else return false. All right. Again, depending on how you write this, you may be changing a few things. All right. And then we've got the delete. And even though it's, it's a fairly important operation, it usually involves a lot less code. Again, we are associating our parameters. Again, it's in a try-catch block. All right. And again, close the connection, close the connection. All right. So next, they give you the code for the state database class. Notice what it says. This class contains a single method named getStates that returns a generic list object that contains one state object for each of the rows in the states table, sorted by state name. All right. So they have the actual name of the state here, whereas when we did it in our example, we used the abbreviation for the state. It wouldn't be hard to change that. All right. The MMA books database class or DB class contains a single method named getConnection that returns a connection to the database. It says, as you've already seen, the customer DB and state DB classes call this method to get the connection. That's what you want. You want it in one central location. We already talked about this. All right. It says, although the SQL Server Express local DB was designed to be used only during development, again, that's the local part, okay? We used SQL Server, and we used that with the Management Studio, but it would be virtually identical to what we're doing. It's just another way of doing it. It says you can also use it for small production databases. Be real leery about that, because a lot of times things that start out small get big in a hurry. All right. It says, in addition, you may want to store the connection string in an external configuration file, as was discussed earlier in the chapter. Okay. Then you could change the location and no one would be the wiser. And again, not a lot of code in here, really. This is the state thing, but there's not a lot to do with the state. All you're doing in here is you're coming in and you're basically populating the state information in the database. All right, when do you need that? Well, you need it if you're doing an insert, an update, or a delete, right? And the other nice thing about doing it this way is you want to make sure that they choose a state. All right, they haven't done this, I don't believe, but you could even default a state if you wanted to do that. All right. Next, they show the customer maintenance form. It says, because this form doesn't contain a load event handler, nothing special happens when you bring it up. In other words, nothing is pre-populated. Well, that's because it's maintenance, but you don't know yet exactly what record it is you want to make changes to. So until you make changes to something, and again, you've seen this, but just so you do, that when you run this, there's nothing in there. That's what they're talking about. As soon as I put in something, in fact, if I put in here 11111111 and click Get Customer, all right, at least I should get a message like this. No customer found with this ID, please try again. That should make sense. And I don't think they've done it here, but notice I can put in letters. Again, this would have been a great place to set that up, like we did in that simple data entry project, where in here, the only thing you could be able to put in were either digits or the backspace key. If I put this in, I don't know if it blows up. No, it just says customer ID must be an integer. At least the good news is they have checked for that stuff. Interesting that if I put in a number that's out of range, it comes back. Well, I made one that was too big. All right, so I broke it. But let me try it again just to show you this. It's not a big thing, but it's the kind of thing as a designer and developer, you have to think about. Someone put in here 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it comes back and it says, no customer was found with this ID. That's fine, but look on the screen. Because when I click OK, see how it cleared out the field? But if I put hello there and I click customer, it says it must be an integer. But it doesn't clear out the field. I mean, that's probably an oversight on somebody's part, but it's just a nicety that you want to do for people. All right? You want to give them a friendly message to let them know they screwed up and then send them right back where they should be. Because think about this. Maybe not in this example, but this is the kind of thing that could easily be used in some kind of an e-commerce application, right? And you don't want to say anything insulting or demeaning to somebody so they leave and say, I want to buy it someplace else. Now you just lost money. All right. So again, this is the customer maintenance rather. Notice we've got a get customer, private void button get customer right here. Which is going to call the get customer, which attempts to get a customer. And again, you'll notice how it puts it into a try-catch block. All right. Display customer, add, modify. Again, this is pretty much it for the rest of the chapter, but hopefully as you walk your way through there, it at least makes a little bit of sense to you. All right. And like I said, please, when you're doing your course evaluations, if you think, yeah, we should have spent more time on this, put that down. If you think, maybe it would have been better to just go over the stuff in the book, put that down. That's fine. I'm not adverse. I've done it both ways. I've done some semesters where I've done stuff out of the book, and then in the last day or two, I'll bring in, an example like you've been working on. And sometimes people say, I wish we would have done that. And other people say, no, that would have been too confusing. I'm glad we did it the way we did it. What you get when you do it, the way they show it in the book is you get more regimentation. Stuff is pretty much set up in a certain way. All right. Finally, they give you the code for the add and modify customer form. Okay. That's pretty much it. Now, again, I just want to mention, so tomorrow, the first thing that we will do, now we're in section 5. All right. So as it says, it's the last section of the book. In chapter 21, you learn how to read and write the data to the 2 file types. What are the 2 file types? Text files and binary files. What are the differences between them? A text file can be read with a simple editor. A binary file cannot. If I took this file that I've got right here, the one that's on screen, and I don't know what format this is in, but if I tried to read that in Notepad, it would just come out as junk. All right, so we'll talk about that. We'll also go through chapter 22. As it says, you'll learn how to read and write the data in XML files. Talk a little bit more about XML. And just so you see this, notice right here, if you look up on the screen, can you see, for example, where it says summary and all this other stuff? Anything in gray there? Those are XML comments. They literally will get written out to a different file. All right. And there's different stuff that you can do with those kind of comments. Most languages show you something like that and allow you to do something like that. So again, we will go over chapter 21, which is on simple file handling, and we will go over chapter 22, which is on XML. That's the plan, as I've already mentioned to you. That is the plan for tomorrow. Then on Wednesday, we will go over chapter 23. That's on link. Line integrated query. So we'll talk about that. And again, I'll have an article to show you. Thursday, we'll go over chapter 24, which is more in-depth ADO.NET. All right. And then that'll be it as far as the lecture component for the rest of the semester. So the only thing that you got to do, if you've turned in the homework through chapter 18, the only thing you've got to do is I told you to try to create this one, this data designer one that we've been working on. I gave you the one with all of the data grid views, and I asked you to try to modify it, create your own, where you brought in the individual fields. All right, you don't have to do anything else that's special with it. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, and I again, I'm going to start looking at your homework probably when I get home tonight. And then like probably next Monday, I will look at the homework for chapter 19. So you should have a pretty good idea when you leave here on Thursday, as long as you've got your electronic portfolio done and it looks presentable, all right, your grade should be able to do nothing but go up from where it is. I mean, if you're at an A, it can't go up, all right? But, you know, if you're at a B or whatever, it can, and it can always go down if you don't do that, all right? End of sermon. All right, that's it till tomorrow then.